guys, and welcome back to another episode of Not Your Mama's Murder Case Revisited. This time we are talking about, of course, Scott Peterson and the new evidence that his team claims could exonerate him. It's kind of crazy to me how these cases that we've talked about have made their way back into the headlines. Alex Murdaugh was one I was completely not expecting. Scott Peterson, on the other hand, in my opinion, allegedly, has done everything possible to keep his name in the headlines literally since he's been in jail. So this one comes as a little less of a surprise. Of course, this is about the two-part... I don't know what that noise was. The two-part documentary that was released on A&E over the weekend. Essentially, I watched it and took some notes of my opinions on it so that you don't have to. And it heavy on, these are my opinions. You do not have to agree. I get a little unhinged in here if we're being completely honest. So I apologize in advance for getting so worked up. But this is my podcast, my platform, my opinions. You do not have to agree, and that's fine. It does not hurt my feelings at all if you disagree. But if you choose to watch it, good luck is all I'm going to say. I don't know. It was not my cup of tea. And I actually took a couple of different breaks just trying to get through it because it was a little frustrating for me. With that being said, we can go ahead and jump right in. This is going to be very similar to the way I watched the Mackenzie Shirilla thing. I'm just going to kind of tell you what was going through my mind as I watched it rather than tell you, like, move for move what's happening on the screen. And then we're going to talk about the actual court filings and what was said about those. So my first statement is we aren't even into the actual show, just the coming up on, and it is already unhinged. And it was. I mean, they took every bit of voice clips they could get that would be salacious and clickbaity, and that's what they used. I said, this man, which at the time I didn't realize who he was, I said, this man claims the Peterson case is unsolved in his head, as if someone hasn't been behind bars for it the entire time. And then I went on to say, I guess I get what he's trying to say, but if he thinks that Scott is innocent, maybe he should word it that way. That way, it doesn't come across as if he feels like justice hasn't been served for Lacey and Connor, and really Scott. I mean, if you think that he is truly innocent, then say, this isn't justice for anybody, including Scott. Just, I don't know. I don't like it being, the term unresolved feels icky to me. It feels weird, and again, this was in the title sequence, so I thought maybe it was just taken out of context, but it just didn't feel right to me. I said, I feel like I've heard, quote, what if everything you know about this case is just wrong, end quote, too many times in regards to Scott Peterson. It is burned in my brain that his sister-in-law, I believe she was, I think it's his brother's wife, saying, everything you know is from TV and everything is wrong. And it, like, somebody else said something similar here, and it just, no. I noted that the LA Innocence Project's trying to piggyback off of the actual Innocent Project and use their name to make headlines is absurd in my opinion, and this will come up again later. The actual Innocence Project that helps actual wrongfully convicted people, and a lot of time that is people of color, so important. So important. It's a lot of people that were railroaded because their family wasn't wealthy. Like I said, they are immigrants, things like that, and a lot less wealthy, quote, handsome looking white men. So LA trying to capitalize on that is gross, and unfortunately it is working. I said some guy saying that the case is unresolved and admitting that he is interested in it because it is a well-known case is gross. And I believe that he really chased it from the beginning. This is Chris Pixley. He is an attorney. He was involved with the case from the beginning, and I think that he's just trying to stay relevant with the case. He seems to think that people who believe Scott is guilty thinks it's an open and shut case, and I personally don't think that that's the case with it at all. I don't think anything about the murder of Lacey and Connor Peterson was open and shut, but that does not make Scott innocent either. He then name dropped that he worked with the Menendez brothers, and we'll get there. We'll cover them eventually, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell you my opinion is that they have served their time and they should be out. If Gypsy Rose Blanchard is out walking the streets, Kyle and Lionel? Why is my mind going blank? What is the other one's name? Anyways, Lionel? That doesn't sound right. The Menendez brothers should be out. That's my opinion. I'm just going to say it up front. So if you worked with those two, maybe those two were the two that you should put all this energy in trying to get out. And then I said, oh, he's been chasing this case since 2003, which I hold firm on that. And they just kind of briefly touch over some of the things they're going to go over in the show. I said the size of Connor is not new information. It was talked about at trial and covered in the original documentary that came out about the case. I'm unsure why it's being called new evidence. And that's something I'm going to say over and over and over again. I just didn't realize as we were just getting started here. They called it new evidence. Nothing is new, guys. Like, not a single thing they are going to talk about is new. Like I said, they were just kind of jumping through what they were going to talk about. So I said currents in the bay are the same. It was talked about at trial and it was covered years ago. And then they talked about how it's impossible to kill someone without leaving physical evidence. It is possible. Unfortunately, there are cases where people get away with it. Is it harder nowadays in 2026? Yes. Yes, but it's still possible, and it was definitely possible in 2003. They talk a little bit about the prosecution's timeline and how it can't possibly be wrong. With that, I actually agree with. I talked about that in my episode. I think that the prosecution did a bad job at proving their case because their timeline was so flawed. At this point in the documentary, Chris Pixley goes to the actual Peterson house, which I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. I enjoy visiting sites that, like I went to the Museum of Death and things like that. But when someone's living in this house and maybe no actual crime occurred there and you're just there because of who the previous owner is, I don't know. It feels very weird, and just to be standing outside of it, I don't know. And keep in mind, it's been 23 years. Things are different. Things changed. What they say they're doing is retracing Scott's steps from the day. Chris Pixley says that Scott was convicted on the idea that he loaded a dead body into his truck in their driveway, which I disagree with. That may be the case that the state presented, but I don't think that that's what the jurors focused on when deciding guilt or innocence. Like, Chris Pixley says, that's the one thing he was convicted on, and I just don't think that's the case. They proceed to the warehouse, because like I said, they are retracing Scott's steps, and the way they're talking about it and presenting it in their own way still doesn't seem possible to me. And maybe that's because I am biased and I don't personally believe what they're saying is what happened. But I will say that I always disagreed with the state's case too. So while I disagree with the words coming out of Chris Pixley's mouth, he's arguing against the state, and I don't agree with the state either. So I'm falling at a weird in-between place here. And I think that is kind of the theme of the Scott Peterson case for me, It's a lot of two things can be true at once. So he proceeds to say something along the lines of Scott is too dumb to get away with murder, which gave me a little laugh. And then he does question why Scott would be driving 3 hours round trip to fish for less than an hour. And again, that I agree with. It never made sense to me. I talked about that in my original episode, which if you have not listened to that and you're listening to this, I highly recommend going and listening to the first episode, obviously, to make most of this make sense. It's funny to me, Chris Pixley goes on to say that Scott got luck after luck after luck. And I phrased that in my episode as it's bad luck after bad luck after bad luck. So it's just funny how we're agreeing, but we look at it in very different ways. He sees it as good luck that, like, he's saying that it was good luck that nobody saw him load the body into the truck. It was good luck that the boat didn't turn over when he was trying to dump the dead body. Whereas I'm saying it's a bad look that you just bought this boat 2 weeks prior when your relationship started. It's a bad look that you're calling your mistress from the visual. Like, I don't know, two perspectives of the same thing phrased very differently. I found that very interesting. They're walking at the marina and they're saying people are out right now just like they would have been, but they're not taking into consideration that while this may be the same place and the same time, it's not Christmas when they're here. Most people are home with their families, especially people who have pregnant wives expecting their first child in a few weeks, but I digress. Sorry, I'm just reading what I wrote here. Oh, they showed home video footage from what looked like a cookout or something like that. There was a pool and people were eating. And whoever was behind the camera said, like, pans to Lacey and says, quote, "And this is Lacey. You can tell she is pregnant. Just look at that stomach. It's really sticking out," end quote. This is something new. This is the only new evidence in this whole thing. I had never seen this video before, and it is gross. Pregnant or not, we do not need to comment on anybody's bodies. Lacey's in a swimsuit, and she's clearly uncomfortable. She pulls the towel up over her belly because she just, I mean, you have to feel bad about yourself when someone says something like that. It made me so sad for her. And it sounds like in the back you can hear Scott say, "Oh, Mom." So I'm guessing it was his mom, but it's just a rude thing to say. Pregnant or not, like, just don't worry about other people's bodies, okay? They go on to start talking about how Scott cooperated with the police. And again, this is how two people can look at the same thing and see it different ways. I think he cooperated because he was cocky and he thought he was the smartest person in every room. So he didn't think the police would find anything or do anything. They go on to talk about how the police officer took a gun out of Scott's truck, and I said, yeah, that's usually how searches work. They take your weapons. I said he consented to the search, so why are we upset that things were confiscated? Again, that is how it works. I guess the same detective also destroyed notes from a case, and I said that's a fair point. It's weird that he would destroy notes from any case. I feel like most detectives keep their notes even after the case is closed or whatever, in case something like this does come up and they can go back. So I will give him that. That is weird. I don't know why a police officer would be doing that. Someone in this called Scott a douche, and I just think that's hilarious. Like the way she said it, like she was like, "He's not a murderer. Is he a cheating douchebag?" Sure, or something along those lines. They talk about how the police had tunnel vision, and I do think there are some cases, some police officers who get tunnel vision. I don't know that I agree that Scott Peterson was one of those cases. When you're investigating a crime, you always start at the people closest to the victim and move out. Like, as you eliminate the closest people from the suspect list, then you move out. They were unable to eliminate Scott from that list, so then they didn't move on. I don't know. Again, it's another case of us seeing the same thing and looking at it very differently. Something we do agree on, I think it's surprising how much when I agree with Chris Pixley, I agree with him, and when I disagree, I disagree. There's like no in between. But he's talking about how a lot of people wanted to read into Scott's body language and demeanor, and they decided he was guilty from that. And I agree that you don't know. You don't know how people are going to act or react to trauma and shock. You just don't know. And every single person is different. One of my I don't want to say favorite examples, but a big example of this is in the case of Pam Hupp. The husband, Russ, he thinks he discovered his wife after committing suicide, dying by suicide. Sorry, I don't like to say committing. After dying by suicide. And he calls 911 in a panic, and it sounds fake. It does. It sounds put on. But it wasn't. It was true. And then even his interrogation, he will be hysterical talking to the police in one moment. And then the next moment, he's calm, cool, collected, talking to this police officer like he's an old friend. And he was completely innocent. And so that one is a good example. It's a good, I can't think of the word. I know it, but representation, I guess, is a good way to say it, of how differently even the same person can act 5 minutes apart talking about the same thing. So I agree with him that body language and demeanor, you can't convict on that alone. Now, if that plays into other things, like honestly, a lot of people read into Chris Watts's body language. They were correct. So I think when you have other evidence to back up the body language, sure. But I don't think that Scott Peterson was one of those cases. They're talking about how Scott had only bought the boat 2 weeks before all of this happened. And I said, but they're not talking about the fact that that lines up with the time he started his affair with Amber. I was surprised how little Amber was brought up in this entire thing. I think they tried to avoid it because they want to give Scott like the good boy edit. So they tried to avoid talking about cheating or Amber or the affair or whatever. But anyone who knows the case, it's in the back of your mind the whole time. Like, yeah, you're going to talk about he bought that boat 2 weeks ago, but in the back of my head, I know that's also when he started seeing Amber. They are talking to a handwriting analysis showing that Lacey wrote notes about the boat. They're claiming that she didn't know. In my opinion, Lacey knowing about the boat doesn't mean that the rest of the family had to know about the boat. I don't know. Apparently, they were trying to say that it was kept a secret from everyone because he planned to use it to harm her. Like, that was the theory. I don't think that has to be the case at all. I think she probably did know about the boat, and she probably did take the notes. But going back to the analyst, he's saying that she's independent, yet she knows whose handwriting is whose and their names. If you're going to be completely independent, keep it anonymous. Don't tell her which one's Scott's. Don't tell her which one's Lacey's. In fact, don't tell her what case she's looking at all. Just tell her, I have these 2 handwriting samples. I have this note. I need you to tell me who's more likely that it wrote it. And let her pick, is it Scott or is it Lacey? But don't tell her the names. That's literally what they did in The Jinx, the movie, or the docuseries. Andrew Jarecki hands him the envelopes and is like, okay, which one did the murderer write and which one did you write? And he can't tell them apart. So I don't know. It just seems textbook, and you can't call it independent if she knows who is who, in my opinion. we're back to talking about the tides and the currents of the water. And I said again, they were talked about in trial. I said, I think it's unlikely that new evidence would cover a simulation of every single day between the day that Lacey went missing and the day that she was found, because it was months. It seems more like AI than actual, studied and backed research. Junk science is what it seems like to me. They're talking about where Scott put himself fishing, and I said, so you're taking his word for where he was at that day as if he would tell you the truth and using it as fact. So even if you do have this wonderfully backed science about the titles and the currents and all that, it still starts with the fact that you got the information of where he was from Scott, who would have a lot of reasons to lie about where he was, to make you think, oh, the body couldn't have washed up here because I was all the way over here, so I couldn't have put it there. I don't know. It just seems flawed from the beginning. So even if it was state of the art, the world's best current simulator, it doesn't matter to me because you have to throw out the location that would be the starting location for the body, because I don't think Scott would have told the truth about where he was. Oh, okay, so now they're walking to where they think the body would have had to have been dumped, and they're saying, why would you go by boat when you could just drive down the trail? So I said, this guy doesn't believe that Scott could have or would have loaded a body in a truck in broad daylight, but he fully believes that someone else would drive down a walking path in a vehicle, which that alone would draw attention, to dump a body from land in shallow water in broad daylight and not get caught. And that body would stay underwater in the shallow water by the shore without being spotted for 4 months. Somehow he thinks that is more believable than Scott being out on a boat and doing it and lying about where he was. This is where I said I honestly had to take a break at this point, because the mental gymnastics they are doing to prove their case is a lot to process, and truthfully it was. They start talking about the neighbor sightings. The one neighbor that they really hammered down on said that she saw Lacey at 10:18. I said, this backs my theory that Scott came home after he went to the warehouse, and I am still so shocked that this has not been considered by anyone. I've never heard that anywhere but from my own mouth, and I can't believe it. I can't believe that more people haven't said our timeline of events could be wrong. They're talking about how important eyewitnesses are and how the police didn't circle back, but I said eyewitness testimony is notoriously, I think my mouth just tried to combine eyewitness testimony and notoriously all into one word. That was so weird. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously wrong. But again, that's another case of two things can be true at once. Maybe that the eyewitnesses did see her and then Scott came back. I say again, they say that there are so many new things, and I have yet to hear a single new thing in the evidence. This was the end of part 1. I said, so far I'm not impressed. It's the same thing we have heard over and over and over again for years. I still stand where I've always stood. I'm very teachable. I am open to hearing evidence and changing my mind or my opinion, or at least considering it. This isn't doing what they want it to do. The same evidence that they think is convincing is doubling down for me in a lot of this. And so, unfortunately, I think they were doing the opposite, but it's fine. I always said that the prosecution didn't do a good job at trial, and that based solely on the jury misconduct that Scott should have gotten a new trial. If I were on that jury and heard the evidence, I probably don't know that I would have been able to find him guilty. Not because I don't think he's guilty, but because I don't think that they did a good job. They did leave room for reasonable doubt. Their job is to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And in my opinion, they didn't do that because their timeline and theories just don't make sense. But again, I said at the beginning, I think it's been a little too long for that. Getting into part 2, I said we open with the robbery case across the street. Again, this is nothing new. We can't nail down when the robbery happened, so we have no way of knowing if it's connected to Lacey or not. In my opinion, just like with the currents, you gotta throw that out. You don't know. Nobody knows. So, throw it out. They proceed to talk about how houses in the neighborhood were being cased before Lacey's disappearance and the robbery and all that. Yeah, that's usually how robberies work. I mean, literally, we've all seen Home Alone. That's what the opening scene is. The other one, is dressed as a police officer casing the joint. That's how it works. At this point, which I'm just realizing that we are just now, like, starting part 2, but I was already, like, at my wit's end at this point. I said, if I hear Los Angeles Innocence Project one more time, we know who is arguing he is innocent. And then I said, just a friendly reminder, they are not associated with the actual credible Innocence Project. They go on to talk about an eyewitness being hypnotized. So I said, why are we arguing the credibility of hypnosis? It doesn't matter, and the lady doesn't remember being hypnotized anyways. Again, throw it out. It doesn't matter. At this time, I felt like I was wasting my time, if we're being honest. I said, Chris Pixley sitting in a car leaving messages for eyewitness from over 20 years ago is so sad. Leave these people alone. And this is when it started to become clear to me that they're talking about the evidence, but their underlying story is that the police were out to get Scott. That's what they're saying here. And this is when it started to hit me. They started talking about the white van that would have been used for the robbery, and then they start talking about how a van was found being burned. And they show a picture of that van, and it's orange. So, again, it's not related. You can't connect this white van that was reportedly connected to this robbery and this orange van that's being burned. Because the orange van probably isn't connected to the white van, and the white van is only connected to the robbery and likely not Lacey's disappearance. So, the orange van, is too far degrees in separation to even be considered to be talked about, which I think is crazy, but they're going to go on and talk about it. Before we get there, at this point, I said, I'll be honest, guys, I'm losing steam with this. They are going on and on and on about things that have been proven time and time again to not be related. And I'm going to get a little heated here because it's just the same thing over and over. I said, now we're talking about the half-burned mattress in the back of the van. Apparently they think that brown stains on this mattress might be blood. Have y'all ever seen a mattress that an unhoused person may be using or living on or sleeping on? Typically there are a lot of brown spots, and I don't mean that in a bad way or derogatory way, just that, they take what they can get. It's a place to lay your head. I get it. It's probably going to be dirty. It's in the back of a van that was set on fire. Doesn't mean it's blood. They talk about how a man's DNA was found on the mattress. It was somebody's mattress at one point. Hello, somebody put it in the van. I was just very annoyed at this point. Then they start talking about the cadaver dogs and the scent dogs and how they were wrong and blah, 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 blah. And I said, yes, this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I think that dogs are a junk science in almost every case. I personally think their noses are too sensitive to a lot of scents, and cross-contamination is far too easy when it comes to these dogs. And so, yeah, you can use them as a tool, but I don't think we can hang a whole case or conviction on them, which is what they're trying to do. And I personally think that dog science should be inadmissible in court because it's no more reliable than a polygraph, which is a lie detector test for anyone who doesn't know, and those are inadmissible. So, I don't know. That's my opinion. I love dogs. Don't get me wrong. I just think that they make too many mistakes to be considered reliable. One specific case is one that I'm going to cover soon, the case of Mara Murray. Dogs tracked her to the end of the road, and then that's it. And so people like to hang their hat on that. Oh, she walked to the end of the road and she got in a car and she went away. I disagree with that. So, I don't know. Dogs they can make mistakes, and that's okay. I just think that we have to, it's not the same as DNA evidence, it's not the same as fingerprints, but we like to treat it like it is because we love dogs so much. So, they circle back to the robbery and how the robbery case files were not turned over in relation to Lacey's case. And I said robbery evidence wasn't kept on file because that case was solved, people were arrested, and it was determined to be unrelated. I have nothing more to say, even though this section seems to be lasting forever. The first episode seemed to cover a lot of talking points, and this one seems to be focusing on just a couple of things, and it's actually exhausting. I said I'll always try to go into these with an open mind, but literally nothing new has been mentioned, and that's literally the title of it, new evidence. It's the same stuff we've heard for 20 years and that the court has heard over and over and over in appeals. Like, it's time to move on, okay? Then they start talking about Connor's size, okay? And I got really frustrated here. Connor's size has to be thrown out for me. It holds no weight. Babies grow in the womb so differently. Even the same woman will have different babies. Also, the doctors and the science they use, they truly don't know. They're using their best guess with the technology they have, but that's literally it. I was told from 20 weeks to 38 weeks that my son was going to be a dwarf because his legs were measuring short, but his torso was measuring normal. Weston was born 2 weeks early and 20 inches long. Not a dwarf. He was fine. My best friend has large babies. I have small babies. Guess what? Now as children and toddlers, her babies are still big and my babies are still small. Genetics are weird and they work like that. Her 7-year-old is almost as tall as my 10-year-old. But she, herself, my best friend, is about 8 or 9 inches taller than me. So naturally, her children are going to be larger than my children. It makes sense for her babies to be bigger than mine. Lacey didn't have any other children that we could compare Connor's size on. It doesn't matter. He was growing what was considered normal, and he likely would have continued to grow normal, but you don't know. She hadn't had an anatomy scan in weeks. I like the doctor they bring on because he's actually trying to say that he cannot determine how old gestation Connor was, that it's just his best guess. He was actually the most refreshing part of the documentary because he kind of fought back with Chris Pixley a lot. He did not let himself get railroaded, and I like that. He literally says, and I have this in all capital letters, you cannot get an unborn fetus's growth down to 1 day. It's all a guess. It was a lot. And I actually said, guys, this is making me irrationally angry. That I'm so irrationally angry that I'm coming out thinking Scott is even more guilty than I thought coming into this. Like, why are you trying so hard to go after these same things and twist it and spin it? It's just not gonna work. I said, I swear this plays into my theory that people want to believe Scott is innocent. Women want to believe that he is innocent because he was at one time handsome, and men think he is cool. They want to be him or be with him. And so they want to believe he is innocent. And this was making me double down on that. I said, all of this evidence is old news. It's BS, and it literally doesn't matter. I said, give Scott a new trial, not based on any of this, but on the basis of him not getting a fair trial and all the jury misconduct. Find 13 people that have been living under the rock and haven't heard of this case, and try him again in a fair manner, and let the jury find him guilty again, because that's what's going to happen. I went from, if I was on the jury, I probably wouldn't have found him guilty, and I stand by that, to like, put this evidence that you're giving me right now in front of a jury, and I think they'll find him guilty. That's how bad of a job this documentary is doing. I literally said, let a jury find him guilty again, so that the dang LA Innocence Project can shut the hell up and leave his name out of the media and let Lacey and Connor rest in peace. Guys, I was fed up at this point. And then I said, I just realized that I have 20 minutes left, and I'm rolling my eyes, because what could we possibly talk about for 20 more minutes? And then they start talking about a completely different case. So I said, what does any of this Frank Carson stuff have to do with the Peterson case? And then it clicked to me that they were trying to say that not only was the police out to get Scott Peterson, but the DA was too, because the DA prosecuted this Frank Carson man because she thought he was a murderer. So they're saying she's corrupt. He was going to run against her, so she tried to put him in jail. Okay? Or, again, seeing it from a different lens, she thought he was a murderer and he deserved to be in prison, and so she went after him. I don't know. I don't know enough about that to speak on it, truthfully, but it was a weird side road we went on for them to tie together that everybody, the entire police station, the detectives, everyone was out to get Scott, I guess. They circle back to the robbery. I said an 8-month pregnant woman did not confront a bunch of criminals. Even if she did witness the robbery, she probably would have just called the police. And then they try to say that someone saw a pregnant woman be put into a white van 3 miles away from her home. So you want me to believe that she walked 3 miles pregnant? Okay. Those robbers, by the way, were caught and arrested. And then they try to say that they immediately were like, yeah, we did it, we admitted we did it, but please don't hang the murder on our heads. That's valid. If all I did was rob somebody, but they want to put murder on me, I'd say the same thing. I'm annoyed. Oh, Mark Garagos. Sorry, I had to reread what I typed because I had a typo in there and I was confused about what I was trying to say myself. But I said, Mark Garagos, you're so annoying. Tell your theory or don't sit down for the documentary. Because he says he has a theory and it's provable, but he's not going to tell us. Why? Why are you here then? They talk again about how they didn't turn over the evidence for the robbery. They don't have to. It's not related to Lacey. It's not part of this case, so why would they give you their notes on the other case? Again, he repeats that everyone thinks it's an open and shut case. I said, no one but you has said it's an open and shut case. He talks again about demeanor evidence. I said, I agree. It cannot be used if that's all you have. I said, reminder, the bodies were found where Scott was fishing on Christmas Eve, an hour and a half away from where they lived. He had a mistress that he lied to and about and continued talking to following the case of Lacey's disappearance, even calling her from the candlelight visual and pretending to be at the Eiffel Tower. So it's not only demeanor that was being used against him, there were other things. The last 5 minutes of the documentary, and Chris Pixley finally says LAIP, as in LA Innocence Project. He said LA innocence, LA innocence, LA innocence over and over and over and over. Finally, in the last 5 minutes, he shortened it to LAIP. Okay. He talks about how he stress tested this case by walking through it and doing this and doing that. I said, no, you reported the same shit that has been said for years and years and years and years. You proved nothing. Not scientifically. You presented nothing scientific. It is junk science. And then I mentioned again, and I know this is like the third time, I'm sorry, but this is in capital letters, LA Innocence Project, not the Innocence Project. That they are different. And do not let this take away from the actual Innocence Project doing good work for wrongfully convicted people. He talks about how it wasn't convincing beyond a reasonable doubt, and I agree with him, but in the moment I said, well, a jury was convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, no matter how flawed they were. The court of public opinion also thought he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Maybe I shouldn't say this. I was so mad. I said only the people who want to suck his dick think he is innocent. Guys, I'm sorry. That's bad. On screen text comes on saying that the court has denied the motion for a new trial. I said yes, it was denied and deemed admissible because it's not new evidence. I said no matter what name you gave your little documentary. He was talking about how the experts were unreliable. I said it's up to a jury to decide who is reliable and who's not. They plan to take it to the Supreme Court. I said the Supreme Court's going to deny the hearing too. And then the credits pop up and it says executive producer Chris Pixley. And I was like, oh, sorry, I bumped the mic. I gotta stop talking with my hands. I said Chris Pixley, of course, is an executive producer. So he starred in it and he produced it and he wrote it and he investigated it. It's a one-man show at this point. And then I said, I don't have much more to say other than what I already have. I think it's very obvious that I'm angry and worked up. Watching this felt like a waste of time. I'm glad I did it so y'all don't have to. 3 hours of my life I'll never get back hearing the same shit I've heard since I first studied the case when I got into true crime. Literally nothing has changed. Guys, I stand by that. It was a waste of time, a waste of them making a documentary. I literally said it in there. I don't think I would have found him guilty. But now I'm like, oh, he's guilty. Any jury would find him guilty. Like, they accomplished the exact opposite of what they were hoping to accomplish with this documentary. And I know there are people who think Scott is innocent, and I love that for you. I do. I feel like a lot of people, especially in the true crime space, think that if someone doesn't agree with them that they are wrong. That's not the case. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion. Everybody, clearly, as we saw in this, everybody looks at a case differently. Even the same facts we can look at differently. So, that's fine. I love it for you if you think Scott is innocent. My opinion is that he's guilty, and all this documentary did was double down on that for me. So, before I hop off of here, I did just want to read the official statements from the DA over the case. So what this is a list of the evidence that they presented for a new trial, and then the facts, the verified facts, and why the claim was rejected. So it says, new analysis of tides and currents shows the body recovery locations are inconsistent with the prosecutor's dump site story. The court says this position was previously raised and was rejected by the California Supreme Court, and they were rejected by the trial judge, Supreme Court, post-eviction motions, and the habeas petition. And that's going to be the same list that all of these were denied by. The next one is eyewitness accounts of Lacey's morning walk and the clothing she wore support Peterson's account and undercut the prosecution's timeline. The court said Peterson's own statement provided evidence and eyewitness accounts were found inconsistent with the condition of Lacey's remains, in conflict with the evidence of likely untrue. meaning not credible. So the next one, new DNA tested relating to items associated with an orange van, mattress cuttings, a fuel container, and items that washed ashore in the San Francisco Bay. A plastic bag with tape and a wad of duct tape could exonerate Peterson. The court said, in 2025, Motion sought testing of the exact same items already denied testing in 2024. So this is their third attempt. The court found this request deficit and lacking merit, citing inconsistencies in the van sighting reports, the defense's Bay theories, and physical conditions of the evidence, meaning barnacles and it had just been in the water too long. In 2024, the court reviewed the same claims. The court found the defense failed to develop a reasonable probability that Lacey had been in the orange van during the commission of a crime, and that there was no evidence of blood on the mattress. Again, brown stains do not mean blood. The court also found that the conditions of the items from the bay suggested they were in the water for a different amount of time than the victim's remains. Meaning, they could have been there a week after Lacey was placed there and found at the same time. They could have only been there 2 days before Lacey and Connor were found. So, this new evidence, i.e. Peterson's claims regarding what Lacey was wearing, Lacey sightings, Lacey knowledge of the boat, botched police investigation, destruction of evidence, and the robbery, establishes Peter's actual innocence. Judge Hill found that all of Peterson's claims, taken individually or together, fell far short. Wow, that was so hard to say. I'm so sorry. Of producing actual innocence. Peterson's theories about the Medina burglars and the number of them kept expanding and was speculative at best. Peterson's own statements and his eyewitness accounts regarding Lacey's morning walks and the clothes she was wearing were found to be inconsistent with the condition of Lacey's remains, in conflict with the evidence, and likely untrue. Peterson's claims that Lacey knew about the boat was presented at trial, and this is not new evidence. We could say that about all of this. Peterson's accusations that police and prosecution either intentionally or in bad faith destroyed or withheld various pieces of evidence were either immaterial or without merit. Sorry, I lost my place there. Again, denied. Burglars connected to a nearby Medina break-in were responsible for Lacey's disappearance, not Scott Peterson. This theory kept expanding over time and was speculative at best. The same burglary van theory was raised by Peterson and rejected by the jury in the 2004 trial, meaning it was not allowed in back then. The recently unsealed 2004 transcript confirms defense counsel was already discussing this at the time of the trial. New evidence, new scientific analysis of Connor's gestational age shows he and Lacey died after December 24th, 2002, when Peterson was under surveillance. This challenge to the prosecution's expert testimony has already been raised and rejected on the merits by the California Supreme Court. Not new evidence. The jury did not see Peterson's videotaped boat experiment. And this is about his defense team put a weighted dummy in a boat and tried to dump it overboard. And when they did, the boat capsized. Again, junk science. So that's what this is about. The California Supreme Court reviewed this claim during Peterson's 2020 appeal and upheld the trial judge's decision to exclude the videotape boat experiment, finding it unreliable. The court concluded that the defense failed to show that the boat used in the experiment was significantly similar to Peterson's boat, or that the experiment was conducted under comparable weather conditions and at a similar location. The court also observed that the defense employee's actions suggested an intent to undermine the experience's validity and deliberately trying to capsize the boat. Behavior inconsistent with how a killer would likely act, as a killer would have incentive to shift weight to keep the boat from capsizing. So, the California Supreme Court and the judge agrees with me that none of this is new and that they have seen it in appeals at least since 2020 all the way through 2025, but definitely before that too. So, I don't think I have anything left to say. I truly did come out of this thinking that Scott is even more guilty than when I went into it. So I wish I could say I recommend you watching it, but I truthfully don't. If you want to, go ahead and then let me know what you think. And I'll be back on Friday with a new case for us to deep dive. Stay safe out there. Bye.